here's a specific, sorry, I'll use my name as an adjective, Vervaekean proposal, that the very processes that make us intelligently adaptive, relevance realization, which means we have to frame, we have to ignore, we have to prioritize, we have to orient, are also the processes that make us prone to self-deception, because we might be
because we can lie.
we think of sin.
Yeah.
We miss our aim.
Yeah, I agree.
The wages of sin or death. That's what you just said.
Yes.
Right? The wages of sin or death.
Well, as soon as you can abstract, you can lie, right? Because you can build a representation, like you can build multiple representations. That's really or multiple worlds for that matter. That's the essence of the capacity to abstract. Well, then there's no reason that you can't falsify those.
I think even animals, I agree they don't lie. I think lying requires a reflective commitment to the truth of what you state. But I think animals can deceive themselves because they can be deceived. So one organism can mislead, like chimps do this to each other all the time. And my capacity to deceive you is dependent on your capacity for self-deception.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. So one more step along that line, and then I'm going to ask you, Jordan, if the discontinuities that you saw when you were a kid, how you feel that they might be related to this issue of both deception and self-deception, because you talked about lies, the lies that were being promulgated. You talked about the desecration of this play space that you had, which is not precisely a lie, although the erection of the ugly buildings might veer in that direction to some degree. So I spent a lot of time thinking about self-deception, like a lot.
Yeah, it has crossed multiple times.
Yeah. And so it seemed to me that it's akin to Freud's notion of repression, but there's an important difference, because as far as I can tell, repression is like a sin of commission. It's something you do. Whereas most self-deception looks to me like
omission.
Yeah, it's omission.
Yeah, that's what I was just saying. Yeah, exactly. I omit. So I think
I failed to explore. Okay, so lay out your theory of omission in relationship to self-deception.
So it's an omission of insight. So think about the insight. I thought he was angry, but it turns out he's afraid. That's an insight. And I realized that I have oriented the wrong way.
Right. Now I have to reconfigure.
Right. But think about certain egocentric bias or proclivities or whatever that makes me the opposite of prone to insight, that makes me resistant to insight. And what we do is, I think there's an omission. We make ourselves resistant to insights that we might have intimations of.
So here's an account of that. I've got you wrong. You weren't angry, you were afraid. Okay. Well, now I have to figure out at what level of presumption I got you wrong. Like maybe I really got you wrong.
Yes.
And maybe I didn't just get you wrong. Maybe that's an example of a pattern of me mistaking fear for anger that's permeated all my relationships. Okay, now I've got an entropy pit in front of me, right? So I'm going to have to, that's a journey down Dante's Inferno, I think. I'm going to have to go into that pit of uncertainty and do the hard work necessary to reconstitute the world that insight demolished. And the easiest thing for me to do is just not do that, right? I can just not do that.
You just made Iris Murdoch's argument in The Sovereignty of the Good. She talks about the example of the mother-in-law who has like this attitude towards her daughter-in-law. She's coarse. And then she realizes, oh, she's not coarse, she's authentic. She's not rude, she's spontaneous. And then she does the thing you just did. And then she thinks, oh, but maybe this isn't an isolated, maybe there's a systematicity. Think Piaget. Maybe there's a systematicity to my error. And then she faces the choice. The choice is, do I change in order to properly address that systematicity?
Right. Well, okay. Well, so Dante, I think that journey down into Dante's Inferno is a descent into that entropy pit.
I agree.
You know, and then at the bottom, and I saw this in my therapeutic practice a lot too, Dante put the betrayers right by Satan, right? And so imagine that you engage in one of those sins of omission in the situation that you just described. Well, that means that you've betrayed yourself, right? Because you've betrayed your capacity for transformation. I think that's that mysterious sin against the Holy Ghost, is that you've now divorced If you divorce
Oh,
yourself,
interesting.
yeah, well, because it's the sin that can't be forgiven, right? And so you think, what the hell is that? It's like, well, if you violate the spirit of transformation itself, then how in the world could you possibly recover from that? Because you foreclosed off any, and then like in your scenario there was a painful realization of inadequacy on part of the self, because Murdoch's character would now have to think, okay, not only did I make this mistake that's really hurt my relationship with my daughter-in-law and caused her some suffering and elevated me morally as well in comparison to her, but maybe I did that with a bunch of other people.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, and God only knows how many discontinuities that placed in my life, but maybe there's a reason that has to do with me, like a certain kind of blindness, right? Willful blindness that might be associated with that. Because the payoff for her, that's the secondary gain of the Freudians, the payoff for her was that she got to be falsely elevated morally over her daughter-in-law, and even worse, that she was punishing her for that authenticity that would be her own pathway out of her misery.
I think,
Right, so who the hell wants to go through that? That's a metanoia, but it's always down. This is the problem with learning, I think, is that before you transfigure, there's a dissolution into an entropic state. That's that descent into chaos.
well, you see that in insight. Entropy goes up first before you get the reduction.
Yeah, now you said that's been demonstrated.
Yes.
Can you tell me about that?
So it's been demonstrated, the work of Stephan and Dixon. It's very complicated, but what you can do is you can use sort of state space math to translate like where somebody's looking or pointing a finger into like a measure of the entropy of the cognitive processes that are producing the orientation. It's the math is well established. And so what
excess neural activation, is that associated with that increase in entropy?
it depends, because that's hard to measure, right? Because it could be it could be excitation or inhibition, and so you can't just track, right? And so but what you get is you get a significant increase in entropy, and then you get, with the insight, the decrease.
I'm going to bet it'll look a lot like what we saw on Twitter around the H1B thing for the past 3 days, if you were able to measure.
Yeah.
That's interesting, because I've been toying with that idea, Jordan, of being able to see the insight mechanics in distributed cognition, not just in individual cognition.
Absolutely.
Well, that'd be that state of confusion, right? Where, okay, so now you've thrown an anomaly into the mix, and then everybody's chattering about how that might be reconciled.
Entropy
right?
goes up. Yep.
Notice how it's governed initially primarily by this sin of omission. Like nobody actually listening to anybody else, like nobody actually stepping back, taking the stance of humility, which allows them to say, wait, maybe I'm making a mistake, maybe I'm reading you wrong. So this is part of what builds up the entropy, is the hardening of the dialogic space around something which isn't able to actually step into an appropriate level of humility to allow the insight to land.
Well, that's like a definition of tyranny.
I want to pick up. I want to pick up on the humility thing.
Yeah.
So one of the things Kaplan and Simon found, it was predictive of insight, is a thing they called the notice invariance heuristic, which is what you have to do when you need an insight is, so the advice we give people isn't actually the best advice. Think of previous instances where you solved an analogous problem. That's actually not the best, because what you need is you need to think of previous instances where you failed to solve the problem. Now, why? Yeah, good. That's exact, because what you do is you look for what you have failed to change, what you kept invariant across all your failures, and that's the thing you should probably change in your current situation.
That's that too. So that's why the tyrant doubles down in the
That's
Exodus
right.
story.
Right? So humility.
As the anomalies mount, which is exactly what happens in life, right?
And all over the place in our world right now.
Yeah. So, okay, so.
I just want to make one point.
Okay.
I think humility is the virtue of identifying with finite transcendence. Humility is not despair, and it's not hubris. Humility is a confidence in a recognition of a reality that transcends you, but a confidence that you can nevertheless address it. You can be in contact with it.
Okay, so I was at church this morning with Tammy, and I'm kind of getting accustomed to going to Catholic services, and one of the ways this service opens, and many of them, and maybe this is a constant across services, is that the entire congregation professes a disjunction between itself and the transcendent in the form of, like, I have sinned my most grievous sin, right? This is something that really bothered me when I was a kid because I thought it was a reflection of a kind of tyranny. And I think it can be, right?
It can be.
But I think more, when it's oriented properly, it's that prayer for something like humility. Like if things aren't going right for you, especially if they repeat, I mean, one of the things you could pray for, so to speak, reorient yourself towards, is to allow yourself to come to some conclusion about how it is that you're misaligned with the ideal in a manner that's causing this disjunction. And so I wonder too, then, with regards to insight, so you said reflect on your tyrannical past, and essentially, so how you can shed that in the moment, but is it also, so I find, for example, if I'm arguing with my wife and it's not going anywhere, one of the things that the two of us have learned to do is to step back and think, okay, like what the hell are we trying to accomplish here? And at the lower level, it's, well, there's a conflict of goal or micro world, say. And then that can easily devolve into the wish that one of them would dominate, right? Especially if one of the views introduces some uncomfortable entropy into the other one. It's like, just shut the hell up. I'm right. And then the problem goes away. But the problem with that is that